Okay, everybody's here. We are ready to start. Carol, when you're ready to call to order.
Excuse me. Okay. Then I will call the meeting to order. Welcome to our March 13, 2020 board meeting. Excuse me. Let me just say before we start, we appreciate everyone's flexibility in participating in this meeting telephonically and respecting required and important social distancing guidelines we've received from the state and city during this difficult time. I'd like to thank the staff, as always, for their excellent preparation for this meeting and for also pulling together this conference call on short notice. SDCERS has navigated through good times and bad for 93 years, and this challenge will be no different. We will continue fulfilling our mission to deliver accurate benefits and ensure the trust fund's safety, integrity, and growth. Later in the meeting, our Chief Executive Officer, Greg, during the question and comment section, will provide additional information on SDCERS preparation for this health emergency and comments also on the investment area. We have the deepest gratitude for our healthcare and safety professionals who put themselves at risk for the good of our communities. We hope our members, employers, colleagues, families all remain safe and healthy. So today the staff is obviously in the boardroom. They will help us through with the agenda and voting and taking their cues, and with your cooperation, I'm sure we'll get through our important business. So I think we've already called the roll, Cynthia, or do you want to do that again?
We can do it again, just to be sure.
Okay. You want to call the names out?
So we know you're here, obviously. So Karina Coleman.
Present.
Tom Battaglia.
Present.
Charles Hawquist.
Present.
George Kenny. George Kenny.
Present.
Louis Maggi.
Present.
Michael McBride.
Present.
Thanasi Peropoulos.
85% for sure.
Roberta Spoon.
Present.
Jeffrey Wallace.
Present.
Clifford Cheerson.
Present.
Paul Kaufman.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay, and so today when we get to voting matters, we'll have roll call as well for everyone to register their vote. Excuse me, I'm not sick. Do we have any non-agenda public comment?
No public comment.
Okay, great. Then let's proceed into the meeting. Our first item is approval of consent agenda items, which are service retirements, drop entries, drop retirements, and training requests. And let's call the roll then. So let's see, are we going to have a motion or just go have a roll call?
We need a motion in a second.
We need a first and a second.
I will move. This is Karina.
Okay.
Thanasi will second it.
Okay, I'm going to call the roll for voting. Carol Broad.
Yes.
Karina Coleman.
Yay.
Tom Battaglia.
Yes.
Charlie Hawquist.
Yes.
George Kenny.
Yes.
Lou Maggi.
Yes.
Michael McBride.
Yes.
Thanasi Peropoulos.
Yes.
Roberta Spoon.
Yes.
Jeffrey Wallace.
Yes.
Clifford Shearson.
Yes.
Paul Kaufman.
Yes.
And the motion passes 12-0.
Okay, great. Thank you. Our next item of business under business operations is the required approval of the June 30th, 2019 actuarial valuation results for the 3 plan sponsors. As you'll recall, we previewed this item in January, as we do every year, and then in March we vote on it. And again, this is our valuation as of June 30, 2019, and it, among other things, determines the city or the plan sponsors ADC actuarial defined contributions for mid-year. And so I believe Alice Alsberg and Ann Harper are going to present, and that's by phone, correct?
Yes, good morning. This is Alice Alsberg with Chiron. Ann Harper will not be joining me today after all. She has been fighting a cold and lost her voice this morning. So I will be presenting our results today in its entirety. So, and Gene had a previous engagement, so he originally was not going to be available, regardless of the current crisis. He was not going to be available for today's meeting. So,
okay, and everybody ought to be able to reach these slides, of course, on their automated system. Okay, go ahead.
All right, great. So I'll go ahead and get started. If you have any questions, feel free to chime in, or we can save the questions till the end, whatever we think might be easier for this telephone conference. I'll be sure to point out the slide numbers that I'm referring to so that if you're following along on your own, that we're all on the same page. So similar to January's meeting, we're going to take a look at historical trends and evaluation results, as well as the projections for the city, the port, and the airport. And one additional item that we're bringing to you today is a comparison of other public plans. So we're going to be showing a comparison of SDCERS to its peers, both in California and across the U.S. to similarly situated cities. We felt that this would give the board an interesting perspective of where SDCERS stands on certain elements of the funding policy and the funding ratio and the like. So I'm taking us to slide 2, significant developments. In January of 2019, the board adopted the UAL contribution floor for both the city and the port. And that contribution floor would be a payment, a UAL payment set at $275.5 million for the city and $13.3 million for the port, should the UAL payment calculated based on the different amortization periods fall below that value in any year until the UAL is paid off. At that same board meeting in 2019, the board also adopted a reduction in the amortization period for future assumption and method changes from 30 years to 20 years. And as we discussed in the January meeting, Chiron is currently in the middle of a full extensive experience study for SDCERS. So we're reviewing all of the experience from mortality, retirement rates, termination, et cetera, all of the turnover and the assumptions that go into the valuation behind the economic assumptions. And in the past, when there's a change in the actuarial liability from assumption changes, those changes would have been amortized over 30 years, and now it will be amortized over 20 years going forward. And lastly, on our significant developments, we'd like to reiterate that the city experience was largely driven by salary increases. And in fiscal year 2020, for the closed members, so that's the general, fire, and lifeguard members, they had a 3.3% increase in pay, which is slightly above the assumed 3.05%. However, the police members had a 7.3% on July 1st and a 5% on January 1st of this year, and those police members with over 20 years of service had an additional 5% increase. And we'll see how these salary increases impacted the liabilities in slides to come. Moving along to slide 3, assets and liabilities for the city. In this graph, we're depicting the funded ratio over time. So that funded ratio is looking at the actuarial value of assets over the actuarial liability. And in 2019, the city's funded ratio stands at 71.6%. And the lowest funded ratio in the period shown here was in the 2004 and then in 2009 with the economic events. Slide 4, contributions made by the city. In the period shown, in the first 3 years of the period shown, the actual contribution paid by the city, so that's the gold bars, was below the actuarially determined contributions. But since 2006 and forward, so for the past 15 years now, the city has been paying that full ADC, and that's been a strong contributor to keeping that funded ratio at a healthy and growing, increasing rate. The contribution for 2021, so for the next fiscal year, is $365.6 million, and we'll see the components of that in slides that are upcoming in this presentation. Slide 5 shows factors contributing to UAL changes since 2008. So looking at 2009, for example, we see a large increase in the UAL due to investment experience. And all years since then, following, it's year by year, the changes contributing to the UAL, and then the last bar of this graph shows a combination of all factors that contributed to the UAL. So right now, the city's UAL does stand at $3 billion. The initial UAL in 2007 was $1 billion. And what we're seeing in the stacked bar of the all years combined, the black portion of the bar at $824 million, and the purple or colored section there from demographic assumption changes of $568 million, totals $1.4 billion. Of that increase to the UAL was due to assumption changes, so both economic and demographic assumption changes. And when a plan strengthens its assumptions, it's more reflective of the liability that's being calculated in the current year and future years. And we see that the green bar, the investment experience, is at $614 million. So in 2009, the impact from the investment has decreased over time with the favorable returns that had been experienced by the plan in more recent years. Slide 6. We're switching to the Unified Port District. So the Unified Port District has a similar pattern of funded ratio that the city experienced. It was at its highs in the late 90s, early 2000s. There was the dip in 2003, another dip in 2009 in that funded ratio, with the current funded ratio for the port at 75.6%. On the next slide, when we look at the contributions that the port has been putting in have always been in line with the actuarially determined contributions. So they're making the payments in accordance with the funding policy of the plan. For 2021, the ADC, that contribution is $19.7 million. On slide 8, the factors contributing to the UAL changes for the port. Again, we see the black moving straight to the rightmost bar of all years combined of the UAL changes. The increases to the UAL from the assumption changes, so both economic and demographic assumption changes, increased the UAL by $92 million. So that's a large portion of the current $146 million UAL from those assumption changes. When we start to look at the airport authority on slide 9, there is a different pattern of funded ratio. The funded ratio for the airport in 2019 is 90.8%. And with the dip in 2009, when they went below 90% at 86.9%, they very quickly remedied that in 2010 with a funded ratio of 96%. And as we see on the next slide, on slide 10, the gold bars show the drive in maintaining that high funded ratio for the airport authority. 2005, very large contribution. 2010, very large contribution in addition to the actuarially determined contributions. And those contributions we see continue in 2017, 18, 19 above the actuarially determined contribution. And that's due to the policy that the airport has in place that they wish to maintain a minimum of a 90% funded ratio. In 2020, so in the current fiscal year, what the graph is showing is that the payment made by the airport is equal to the ADC, but their additional contribution payment doesn't get made until June 30th. So when we see this graph again next year, that 2020 amount paid by the employer will be higher because it'll include the additional contribution that the airport is making. Moving along to slide 11, the factors contributing to UAL changes, the airport is in line with the same experience that the city and the port had in that the largest driver to the UAL has been those assumption changes. So economic and demographic assumption changes account for 30 million of their UAL. Given the additional contributions, though, that have been made by the airport above and beyond the actuarially determined contribution, their current UAL stands at 20 million. Now we'll get into the details of these valuation results for the current year and compare them to the prior year. I'm looking at slide 13, the valuation results for the city. And in this table, we summarize key results from the valuation. In the first section, the membership, I'd like to turn our eyes to the average salary increase for active members. That average salary increase for actives was 10.2% over the prior year. And that really drove a lot of the liability loss that we'll see on the next slide. In the assets and liabilities section, we see that the actuarial liability increased from the prior year by 4%, and the actuarial value of assets increased from the prior year of 5.3%. So when the assets grow at a higher rate than the liability, we'll see that uptick and increase in the funded ratio. So in the second to last line in the gray section, the actuarial value funded ratio is 71.6%, which is up 0.9% from the prior year. Looking at the gold section, the ADC, so the actuarially determined contribution from this current valuation is $365.6 million. Of that $365.6 million, $288 are from the UAL payment. Now, reflecting on the UAL payment floor, you see that in 2018, the UAL payment portion of the ADC was $275.5 million. So that was the basis of the UAL contribution floor. Now, given that there was unfavorable experience, the current payment is $288, which is above that UAL payment floor. So that's the payment that's being made. It's not held to the floor. The floor is a minimum. Mm-hmm. On slide 14, we present the changes in the actuarial liabilities, assets, UAL, and ADC from 2018 to 2019. The main driver of change we see in the middle of this table, the fiscal year-end 2019 liability experience. There was a loss of $166.5 million. 155 of which was due to salary losses. So that was the main driver in that liability loss, which if we move across that line all the way to the last column, the ADC, we see that that loss on the actuarial liability translates to an $18.2 million increase on the ADC, bringing it from $350.5 million up to $365.6 million for the year. Moving into the results for the Unified Port District, membership was relatively typical, changes there, nothing of note. Taking a look straight to the actuarial value funded ratio, the funded ratio increased from 2018, the value of 74.2% up to 75.6%, so an increase of 1.5%. The ADC is 19.7%, and since the Port District also has the UAL payment floor funding policy, we take a look in 2018, that UAL payment was $13.3 million, that being the floor per the new policy, whereas the current experience brought the UAL payment to $13.7 million, so it's slightly higher than that floor. On the next slide, showing the sources of change for the port, going straight to the ADC column, we see that in 2018, the $19.3 million payment had a slight uptick of $0.4 million given the liability experience. And a $4 million increase in liability other than expected is fairly typical, that balance between some years of experience gain, some years of experience loss. Increased the ADC for this year by $0.4 million, bringing it to $19.7 million. The Airport Authority continues, I'm on slide 17, the Airport Authority continues to remain open, the active membership increasing, payroll in aggregate increasing. In terms of the funded ratio for the airport was at 89% in 2018, up to 90.8% in 2019. So the airport has maintained and reached that minimum 90% funded, but in addition to 90% funded, they then make additional contributions to increase their funded ratio by 1% until they reach 95%. Hence the additional contributions that will be coming in at the end of this fiscal year. Their ADC, when we look at the total ADC and the breakdown of the components, is different from what we're seeing for the port and the airport. It's the normal cost, so the accumulated benefits for active members in the current year is the largest component of the contribution at $4.5 million, whereas the UAL payment is $1.2 million, bringing them to a total ADC of $6.125 million for fiscal year 2020. The airport on slide 18, we see had similar experience in terms of liability experience, a slight increase, and this is shown in thousands, a slight increase to the liability. Their asset experience brought the ADC down by $178,000, and that asset experience was driven by the fact that the airport made additional contributions, so it ended up reflecting a gain on assets. When we turn to the projections for the city on slide 20, the UAL payment floor of $275.5 million allows for that UAL to be paid off by 2035. And then beyond 2035, in the period shown, the contribution is made up of normal cost plus expenses. And in the top graph there, we see that when that UAL payment is paid off, that the funded ratio of the plan does achieve 100%. So when we see that 100% funding in a projection, it means that the funding policy for the plan is working and it's moving in the direction of achieving full funding. On slide 21, the projections for the Unified Port District. We see that with that UAL payment floor, assuming all things meet assumptions, 6.5%, we have that UAL paid off in similar in 2035, 2036, when the plan achieves full funding and is then paying on a normal cost plus expenses year over year. Projections for the Airport Authority on slide 22. In this model, we see that in the top graph there, the gray bars, the actuarial liability for the airport continues to grow and increase because the airport, relatively speaking, is a younger plan that's still accumulating those liabilities year over year. And in the contributions down below, in the graph below, that contribution is following in line with the actuarial liability above, in that those contributions are coming in to cover the normal cost expenses and payoff of the UAL. All right, so that wraps up the results, like a recap of the results from the actuarial valuation. At this point, I'll ask, were there any questions on that section of the presentation? All right, I will continue on with some information that we've put together from various databases. In the first few slides, we'll take a look at SDCERS compared to other California public employers. And then we'll take a look in the last couple of slides, SDCERS compared to other U.S. cities. On slide 24, we compare the discount rate. We have a look at the discount rate. In the top, we see the progression of the discount rate in the top graph from 2009 to 2019. So in 2009, SDCERS was at the lowest end of the pack with that lowest discount rate of 7.75%, and they've gradually decreased the discount rate. And recall, when that discount rate goes down, when you're changing the economic assumption, that increases the liability, and we saw that in the UAL changes. And in 2018, SDCERS discount rate was reduced to 6.5%. So 2018, 2019, the SDCERS diamond is at the bottom of the distribution there. And we see in the graph just below it, in terms of account, SDCERS is in the shaded green on the left. There are two plans that in 2019, their valuation used a 6.5 discount rate. So that was SDCERS and San Mateo County were there with the lowest discount rate at 6.5%. The majority of the California plans are still using a 7% discount rate for their valuation, but we have seen that trend when we look at these comparisons year over year, that is, those discount rates are decreasing. On slide 25, we have a breakdown of that discount rate assumption between the assumed inflation and the real rate of return. SDCERS assumed inflation is at 3.05% in that shaded, gold shaded area, whereas their real rate of return assumption is the lowest in this peer comparison at 3.5%. So showing the conservative assumption there on the investment returns. Slide 26, we take a look at the market value funded ratio of the city plan compared to these other California systems. And SDCERS, in order to make this comparison, on the previous slides, we saw that SDCERS had that 6.5 discount rate, and with a lower discount rate, you're having a higher liability. Higher liability tends towards a lower funded ratio. So what we have done in the calculation to present the information here on slide 26 is that we've normalized the funded ratio of all the plans in the comparison to a 6.5% discount rate to see where SDCERS stands amongst the other plans. So SDCERS lands in the majority of the plans. 13 plans had a funded ratio between 70 and 79% on a market value basis. So that's for the city. And UPD at 77.6% funded ratio also lands in that same shaded section of the bar graph in that 70 to 79% funded ratio, whereas the airport and the UPD were not included in the counts for this comparison based on the database that was used, but the airport would land in the 90% range for their market value funded ratio. On slide 27, we take a look at the elements of the amortization policy. For SDCERS, gains and losses on a year-over-year basis, gains and losses are amortized over 15 years. And of the plans in this comparison, 15 years is on the lower end period. There are 11 plans that use 15-year amortization for gains and losses. In terms of assumption changes in the bottom graph on that same slide, we see that now under the new policy for SDCERS, they are with the PAC at 20 years for amortizing changes from assumptions, whereas previously they would have been to the right of this at that 30-year. Slide 28 takes a look at a single amortization period for the unfunded, for the UAL of the plan. And what that means is if the current UAL payment were to continue as is, rather than taking into consideration all the different layers, and when you have as the layers drop off and new layers come on, you're changing year over year, that period changes. But if you were to roll it all into one, assuming one payment, and for the city taking into consideration that a portion of that payment is based on a level dollar and a portion of that payment is based on 11%, the city's single equivalent period comes out to 14.3%. So they land in the group compared to their peers in that range of 10 to 14 years for the single equivalent period. Now, most of the CalPERS systems use level percent of pay. There are 3 systems that do a combination of this level percent of pay, level dollar that the city employs, and that's the city, LA Police and Fire, and CalPERS have a mix between that level percent and level dollar in terms of the details of the amortization. There are 2 systems that use only level dollar, so LA Power and Water and the UC systems. And then 3 systems use a method known as direct rate smoothing, which sets assets to market value and then does a phase in and phase out of payment for a smooth payment value. On slide 29, we now move away from the California comparison and take a look at other U.S. cities. And this comparison, I'd like to acknowledge that Marcelle gathered this information, and she did some research, quite extensive research, looking across the states, finding similarly situated cities, and gathered their information to see how SDCERS compared to other cities. So in the next couple of slides, the comparison are 10 U.S. cities. So Phoenix, Austin, Seattle, Detroit, Denver, Nashville, Milwaukee, Boston, Philadelphia, and San Diego.
And Alice, this is Marcel. I actually have to thank Monty Pareto for doing this research. He compiled all the research, and I just took credit when I sent it over to you. So this really is his homework.
Thank you, Monty. This was great to see how SDCERS stacks up across the country as well. And we see here in slide 29 that SDCERS is alone in its 6.5% discount rate, leading the pack as the pension plans across the country are reducing their discount rates. And it's quite the eye-opener to see that 5 plans are still at the 7.5% discount rate, whereas when we were looking at this same discount rate on the California systems, the majority of the California systems are at 7% or below. So to see that there are systems across the nation that are still at 7.5%, is a different trend than what we're seeing here in California. Moving along to slide 30, the breakdown of that discount rate assumption between inflation and real rate of return, SDCERS, is in the top graph, the gold shaded at the 3%, 3.05, rounded to 3%, with an assumed real rate of return of 3.5%. And finally, on slide 31, looking at SDCERS funded ratio on an actuarial value of assets basis, this graph, the values were not normalized because we didn't have as much access to as much information. So these are the plans as they stand based on their actuarial value of assets and their liabilities at each city's own discount rate. So even as such, even knowing that there are many plans at that higher discount rate of 7.5%, SDCERS still stands in that 70 to 80% range, which is ahead of the pack in the funded ratio. And that concludes my presentation for today. If there are any questions.
Any questions? I hear no questions. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Alice, for that really excellent presentation. It's always helpful to remind ourselves and educate ourselves about the decisions we've made in the recent past and really over time to be conservative and have an eye on funding our plan in a reasonable time frame and demonstrating our leadership in this area. So again, really, really helpful. And again, if there are no questions or other comments, we will go to a vote to approve this. And we'll look for a motion in a second.
This is Charlie. I'll make the motion.
Bobby, I'll second it.
Ready to vote? Carol?
Yes.
Karina?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Charles? Charlie?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
Lou?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Ganassi?
Yes.
Roberta?
Yes.
Jeffrey?
Yes.
Clifford?
Yes.
Paul? I guess that was a yes. That was a yes, Paul?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And the motion passes 12-0.
Great. Thank you very much. Alice, quick question. When are we going to be seeing the experience study? Can you remind us?
That'll be at the July board meeting.
Okay. And we do that every how many years?
It was every 5. It's now currently set to every 3 years. So the last time we presented on the experience study was for the 2016 valuation.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, well, we appreciate your time today, and I'm sure you'll want to get on to the next part of your day.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay. Next, we have Audit Committee, and they met on Wednesday, March 11th, and we have a report by Chairman Bobby Spoon.
Yes, we met yesterday. We welcomed our new member, Lana Renchenko, to her first meeting, and we had no action items. We heard a report from Sarah on several items. One was the external peer review results. Sarah had a peer review. Other internal auditors came in from out of state, and it turned out to be very, very successful. There were no suggestions that were made. the opinion that she obtained was the very highest available. So we're very proud of the work that she did, and I'd like to congratulate her on this excellent work in the peer review. Sarah also reported on the audit that she just performed for the City of San Diego contribution and reporting. And there was an informational item that she included in her report, but there were no substantive findings. So again, that audit worked out to be excellent. The third thing that we discussed was a recommendation to the B&G committee from the audit committee. And the recommendation initially came from Ed Katrasser. Ed indicated that this will be his 12th year on the audit committee. Wow. As you know, that Ed served on the board for 8, and he was president for 2. He brings valuable wisdom and experience to the audit committee. He started with the historical perspective that the audit committee meetings, especially in the review of the CAFR annually, would take all morning, 3 to 4 hours at least, and there were many recommended changes. Now, the improvement in the preparation of the CAFR and in the internal audit department, thanks to both changes in procedures, improved changes in procedures, and obviously from personnel, we have to give big props to Ted LaSalvia, who always comes through, has been coming through this audit with absolutely no recommended changes. So I want to publicly thank Ted and his staff for the excellent work on the CAFR. But the recommendation from the audit committee to B&G is that the audit committee change the frequency of meetings annually from 4 to 2 meetings per year. We're finding that our meetings have no action items. We believe that we can get the work done in 2 meetings, the overview of the internal audit department and the review of the CAFR. So I believe you'll hear more from the B&G committee on that. We heard reports from Sarah on the Port District's outstanding audit recommendations, and she's happy to report that they are making improvements. We're moving along with clearing the audit recommendations. She reported on the status of the network penetration testing audit, which will be delayed primarily because they're coordinating with the vendor that's also doing the work for the City of San Diego, and the status of the 2021 risk assessment process, which will begin next week. And then we had written reports from Dave in the IT department, and we had no legal report. And that was the end of our meeting.
Okay, thanks for that report, and thank you to Sarah and to Ted for their continued excellent work.
And also, thank you to Ed Katrasser
to Ed for sure. Right.
Oh my gosh, for serving on the audit committee for 12 years is just remarkable. So thank you publicly to Ed.
Very good. Okay, next we're going to move to Disability Committee. Charles Hogquist, Chair.
Good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, yesterday's Disability Committee, we had several action items that came before us concerning retirements, but we had a staff's recommendation to approve an industrial disability retirement for 2 employees, which were both voted on and passed unanimously. We also had a request for to waive the time period for an employee to apply for disability retirement, and we approved that request also unanimously. But in that case, we were correcting an error that was made by our staff in giving the employee misinformation. or lack of information. So to make everything right, we've extended his time period. We also had 2 hearing officer recommendations to deny some disability retirements, both of which passed unanimously. But we did have some public comment from Vincent Nguyen, which is item number 4 concerning his application. And is he here today to speak again?
No.
No. But those were our 4 action items that we did have. And we'll move forward to approve those for the consent item.
Okay, so you're moving it. We don't need a second, correct?
Correct. I believe.
So roll call.
Ready to vote? So Carol,
Yes.
Karina,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Charles,
Yes.
George,
Yes.
Lou,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes.
Thanasi.
Yes.
Roberta,
Yes.
Yes.
Jeffrey,
Yes.
Clifford,
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
All votes are in and the motion passes 12-0.
Thank you. And the last thing we did is we did have a staff report concerning the status or disability status report for the number of applications. And if you reviewed that, the numbers are very, very good. We're probably some of the best I have ever seen, and I commended staff for the good work they're doing. It's really been a great job. And if you see, please let them know that they're taking care of our members well. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. And thank you for your comments on how well our staff is doing. Okay, next we have B and G, and that would be 85% of Thanasi Frivola.
At least 85%. All right, we had 5 action items. They all passed unanimously. The only one of real note is that item number 2 was staff's recommendation to review and amend the appeal of staff decisions regarding benefits policies, donation policies, Public Records Act policies, and committee chair. The big issue on that one was that the audit committee has asked to change its schedule to meet at least 2 times a year. It was previously required 4 times, but as we heard from Bobby's report, due to the efficiencies in the system and Ted's phenomenal work and Ed Katroser's tutelage, it's not really necessary, and so they want the flexibility to have to adjust the meeting schedule to what the actual work needs are. That also passed unanimously. Unless there's any questions, I'm going to move the consent items. Hearing none, I move the consent items. Is there a second?
Oh, we don't need one. So I'm gonna do-
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
So I'm doing roll
That's
call
right.
now.
Roll call.
Carol,
Yes.
Karina,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Charles,
Yes.
George,
Yes.
Lou,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes.
Thanasi,
Yes.
Roberta,
Yes.
Jeffrey,
Yes.
Clifford,
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
All votes are in and the motion passes 12-0.
All right. We had 1 information item and 7 reports. There were no questions or comments on any except report number 1 and report number 2. I'll take those in order. Report number 1 was Member Services Division report by Cynthia Queen, who was not there because she apparently has the coronavirus, and so Marcel took over that. I'm kidding. I don't know that she does. Marcel gave her report, and basically what her issue was is that the 3rd member counseling position is currently being filled by 2 administrative staffers who are job sharing the counseling duties. Those new counselors have completed their their training, and they're now off counseling all on their own. So that also apparently is helping keep headcount down in the office. So we are down from 50 to 48, and that's done through normal natural attrition, not from termination of employees. Item number 2, report number 2 was the Benefits Administration Division. Marcel gave that report. She highlighted that there was an extremely high volume of reimbursement requests in January, predominantly due to the fact that the Medicare reimbursement jumped, I think, by $9 or something thereabout. And so while we normally process 1,100 distributions in a month, we were over 2,600 in January. That resulted in, unfortunately, in 200 people getting their check the following month. The big issue on that is that in the system, if they couldn't process it by the payroll date in January, that check reimbursement had to wait an entire month to the next payroll date. Otherwise, because the software system cannot accommodate interim checks, the committee was not thrilled with that issue. We've asked staff to figure out whether there is a software fix for that, and if so, what that cost would be, because it was determined that they could not issue those 200 manual checks, even though they were still processed within 7 days. They just missed the January issue. I can tell you that the consensus by the committee was staff did a phenomenal job meeting the crushing demand. It was much higher than anticipated, even though we anticipate a higher demand in January. We do not think this is a failing of staff or some issue of that nature. There's been nothing like this in the past 4 years since Iris has come on board, and we've had that additional bandwidth and automation. But again, our job and duty is to get these payments to our members, and so the committee did ask staff to go back and try and figure out how we can mitigate this in the future. If there are no other questions, then I will hand the meeting back to Carol. Carol, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you very much for your report. And
I'm sorry, I did that. Excuse me.
Pardon me?
I'm sorry. This
Yeah.
is Mike McBride. I'm sorry, I'm late on my unmute button. I did have one question. Within the audit, or not the audit, but the budget discussion, there was a point made by Roberta that we were going to possibly bump the personnel count back or keep the personnel count at 50. Is that a change that needs to be submitted prior to approving the budget, or is that something that can just be adjusted as the budget is implemented?
Hi, this is Greg.
Mike,
Go ahead, Tanasi.
No, I was going to say that I think that Roberta can probably comment to that, but I think ultimately the issue is that we believe that due to salary increases due to the experience study that's going to be coming on board, that we're going to have some salary increases, and that her preference, and don't mean to speak for her because she should make her own comment, but I share the feeling that the budget should reflect the anticipated increases rather than it be a surprise down the road. And Roberta recommended that one thing that Ted could do is to leave that headcount in the budget. Alternatively, Ted can simply forecast higher salaries. But I think before Greg's comments, Roberta, did you have any comments that you want to make to Mike's question?
No, you summarized it perfectly, but we need to hear the response from Greg or Marcel.
Mm-hmm.
All right, this is Greg. I would like to prefer to actually move forward with the budget as previously stated in your budget materials and complete that salary study. And if the results of the study require us to significantly move or change our anticipated salary budget, we can adjust it at that time. But I would prefer that we move forward and complete the study, see what we need to do, the magnitude of the change, and make that adjustment going forward. The other thing that we will recognize is that the salary amounts are projected, and I want to make sure that the board is aware of the different projects that we have, and that this will not become as a shock to the plan sponsors, and we don't really need to build that in on the front end at this time.
And Michael, don't worry, because Greg said if he's wrong, he's going to quit immediately.
Understood. I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Okay, any further comments or questions? Hearing none, let's move to Investment Committee, which has action items, and that would be Karina Coleman, Chair.
Yes, good morning. So yesterday we met as a committee and we had 3 action items. The selection of the general investment consultant, staff and consultant's recommendation on the U.S. small cap equity structure, as well as changes to proxy voting guidelines. And I do believe that we're going to walk by each of these step by step. The recommendations did pass unanimously. I think the first one is going to be the selection of the general investment consultant. Liza, did you want to take over from this point, or shall I continue on?
No, sure. I'm happy to take over. I have some summary, high-level comments about the consultant search, which I'd just like to cover. So SDCERS issues an RFP for general investment consulting services every 5 years. Aon was initially selected in May of 2010, and then they were rehired in 2015. For this search, SDCERS hired Cortex Applied Research, which is a firm that specializes in helping institutional investors apply governance best practices and, to help us with this process, provide additional oversight and an unbiased viewpoint. The scope of their services is outlined in the material that you received. SDCERS received 5 proposals, which were evaluated by staff in Cortex. 3 firms were selected to move forward and presented their capabilities to staff in Cortex. Based on those presentations and the information provided in their RFP responses, the field was narrowed to 2 finalists. Staff, with the participation of Cortex, conducted an on-site due diligence visit to each of those 2 firms. The investment committee yesterday heard from the 2 firms, NEPC and Aon, and voted unanimously to rehire Aon. That conclusion was based on a very good fit between SDCERS staff, trustees, and the very senior team of Steve Voss, Katie Comstock, and Ashley Westy. Additionally, Aon has some of the deepest resources compared to other consulting firms. They are considered a thought leader in research, with the largest and very experienced research team. They are the only firm with a dedicated fiduciary services team. They have more actuaries than any other consulting firm. They have the largest and most in-depth operational due diligence team. They also have, in our opinion, the most thorough asset liability process that clearly delineates the mix of return-seeking to risk-reducing assets, which is one of the most important decisions the board makes and directly informs the asset allocation process. Additionally, they have made significant improvements to the portfolio in terms of diversification, returns. Our returns are in the top 12th percentile or above for the 1, 3, and 5 years. Sharpe ratio, which is a measure of how much return you're getting for the amount of risk you're taking. Again, we're in the top quartile or above for 1, 3, and 5 years. And fee savings in the form of moving significant assets to passive indexing strategies, as well as active manager fee savings based on Aon's size and the ability to aggregate assets per manager. So the conclusion was there was really no need for a change given these excellent results, which pretty much speak for themselves. And that concludes my remarks.
And I would just say we had a robust discussion as a committee about these 2 providers. They are both high-quality providers and both have a significant presence in the public pension space. It did come across, as Liza pointed out, that Aon's expertise with regard to the actuarial side and getting the big picture right in terms of the asset liability matching, that did come across. The other thing I will note is that there is a announced merger of Aon with Willis Towers Watson. And while this brings some organizational change, we also view it as a positive in terms of greater resources to leverage. So with that said, I would like to move the approval of Aon, to retain Aon as the general investment consultant.
Okay, we're ready to vote. Carol,
Yes.
Karina,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Charles,
Yes.
George,
Yes.
Lou,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes.
Thanasi,
Yes.
Roberta,
Yes.
Jeffrey,
Yes.
Clifford,
Yes.
Paul. Paul, Paul Kaufman.
While you're on mute.
Okay, he's probably on mute. Do we want to just move on?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All votes are
Okay,
in,
great.
and motion passes 12-0.
Thank you. And the next item we discussed was the restructuring of the U.S. small cap equity structure. And I'm sure Aon will take you there, but most of the conversation was around page 16 and 17 of Aon's deck. So with that, I think I will turn it again over to Liza. We were between two options, option 1 and option 2, and ultimately the committee voted to accept option 2.
Good morning, everyone. This is Anders Norman, just for the audio record. SDCERS has in the past had a bias to small cap stocks in the US equity allocation, double that of its benchmark. And in 2014, as you know, the board voted to reduce that bias by half. And in November last year, the board approved the elimination of SDCERS' remaining bias to US small cap stocks. So staff and the consultants has then been working on determining the best way to implement this, with the goal to create an optimal structure going forward that is free of unintentional biases relative to the US equity benchmark, while also generating the highest possible risk-adjusted return. So after analyzing several different options, staff and the consultant came up with 3 approaches. The first one, labeled in your material as pro forma, simply reduced the allocation to each existing US small cap manager and allocated the proceeds to SDCERS' large cap index fund. While this was the easiest approach, it does not accomplish the goal of a bias-free structure, since it creates an underweight to mid-cap stocks and an overweight to large cap. The second approach, which Karina labeled as option 1, adds a mid-cap index fund to mitigate the underweight to mid-cap stocks and overweight to large cap stocks. While this is an efficient approach and achieves the goal, it leaves the 2 active small cap managers with allocations that will not move the needle in terms of impact on performance. It might therefore be better to use 1 manager to allocate a more meaningful amount to. And the last approach, which is labeled in your materials option 2, fixes that by consolidating the 2 existing US small cap value managers into 1 SMID cap manager and restructures the existing small cap and large cap index fund into 1 broader index fund that's labeled in the material as the Dow Jones US Total Stock Market Index, which is also the benchmark for the US equity allocation. I just mentioned earlier transitioning the small cap managers into a new SMID cap manager. SMID cap is a fairly unknown term and basically means a strategy that invests across both small cap and mid cap stocks, which is important since that's where the name SMID comes from. The main benefit of using a SMID cap manager is fewer managers, as they cover a broader mandate, which increases the manager's flexibility and creates a greater opportunity to add value. And in SDCERS' case, it can also help. It would also help eliminate the mid-cap underweight. These 3 approaches were presented to the investment committee yesterday, and of the 3 approaches, the one that stood out as the most thoughtful way to achieving the goal was option 2. as labeled in the materials. The investment committee voted on this and approved the recommendation yesterday unanimously. So should the board vote to approve this recommendation today, the next step is to bring a new SMID-cap manager to the board for approval at the May meeting. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions. Hearing none.
Karina?
So, yes, as I mentioned, this item did pass unanimously, and we do think that is, as Anders pointed out, a thoughtful way that gives the manager a little bit more latitude to tilt the portfolio as needed. And there was also some talk of using a different type of approach, and it was more of a portable alpha genre, if you will. So this will still be determined at a later meeting, but in any event, this did pass unanimously, and I'd like to make a motion to approve the recommendation to restructure the U.S. small cap portfolio as detailed in option 2.
Okay, ready to vote? Carol?
Yes.
Karina?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Charles?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
Lou?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Thanasi?
Yes.
Roberta?
Yes.
Jeffrey?
Yes.
Clifford?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
All votes are in, and the motion passes 12-0.
The next item on the agenda was some minor changes to the proxy voting guidelines, and to walk us through, Demetrios, if you want to highlight those.
Sure. I just want to make a few brief comments on this, given that it is an action item and something that we do every year. So annually, SDCERS' proxy voting vendor, which you may recall is a firm by the name of Glass Lewis, releases voting guidelines that set the stage for any new important governance issues that they see coming to the fore. Staff then uses these guidelines as a framework to incorporate any relevant changes to SDCERS' voting guidelines. This year, there were 3 proposed changes. Karina, as you mentioned, these were minor in nature, and they are in the materials. So the only other comment I'll make is, as you mentioned, this item passed unanimously yesterday at the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Demetrios. With that, I would like to make a motion to approve the recommended changes to SDCERS proxy voting guidelines.
Ready to vote? Carol?
Yes.
Karina?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Charles?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
Lou?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Thanasi?
Yes.
Roberta?
Yes.
Jeffrey?
Yes.
Clifford?
Yes.
Paul? Paul? Paul Kaufman?
Yes. Should be yes.
All votes are in, and the motion passes 12-0.
Okay, the only thing else I'd like to mention, obviously the next few items are informational in nature, but really the very strong performance that comes across if you look at Aon's total fund performance report for the year ended 2019. And also, even though the markets have been quite volatile year to date, I understand from Anders that our portfolio has fared relatively well, and that is obviously unaudited, but more of a back of the envelope calculation. But I think it warrants mention that just given the turbulence in the market, the diversification of the portfolio is really paying benefits here. And I think that's really a testament to the staff. So very good work. And this was also one of the underpinnings for retaining Aon as well. Tremendous performance from the SDCERS plan. And with that, concludes my report. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. And before we move from investments, excuse me, Liza, would it be appropriate for you to just share what you did with the committee yesterday about your rebalancing and your cash strategy for the next few months, given the market uncertainty that board members may be concerned about?
Sure. Yesterday, we did a rebalancing of about $150 million, which we sold out of our short-term fixed income assets. Those assets actually have positive returns. And so we took the opportunity because we knew, given the downdraft in equities, that a rebalancing was going to be triggered. And so we went ahead and took that action to reserve enough cash so that we are covered for benefit payments and any capital calls that need to be funded or any new investments that need to be funded through the end of June 30th. So in the event that there's continued market volatility, we are in a very solid place with having 4 months worth of cash on hand.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful, and we appreciate your foresight on that.
Thank you.
Okay. Then let's continue to move on as we approach the end of our agenda. It's time for questions and comments. Do we have any board member questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. I believe that Greg has some comments.
Yes, thank you, Carol. I wanted the opportunity to provide the board an SDCERS operational COVID-19 preparation update. And I want to say, first and foremost, SDCERS is well prepared to deliver our monthly retirement benefit payments to our retirees and beneficiary in all challenging operational and financial conditions. Our current goal is to maintain normal operating protocols for as long as practically possible in a safe manner, and that we're going to be following state and local health authority guidance in doing so. And we're going to be looking to operational HR guidance from the city, primarily due to our represented employee MOUs are between the city and the unions, and we need to be respectful of those agreements that they reach. And I understand the city and the represented groups are currently discussing contingency protocols for employees in working rules in relation to the COVID-19 virus health concerns currently before our community. For SDCERS, a key concern with the COVID-19 virus is potential staffing shortages here at work. And this can have to do with employee illness, conditions of self-quarantine, members of our staff that are out due to family obligations, or maybe simply they just are unable to get to work. And so we've identified 24 critical processes, such as monthly retiree benefit payments, cash management for members, investments, vendor transactions, and plan sponsor employee updates. And we are fortunate that we have 2 or more staff able to complete these specific critical processes, and that our financial service providers use online tools that are available to employees here at work, or should they be working remotely at home. We are also fortunate that about approximately 40% of our staff have remote access to their SDCERS applications away from the work area, and we're expanding that coverage to include 60% of our staff, with the capacity to reach as high as 70% as needed. This is great for if staff are required to stay at home, for example, of being quarantined. So this combination of online tools from our vendors along with remote access allow a significant portion of our staff to work remotely. Similarly, if members are unable to access SDCERS, we also have the ability to deliver member services through our secure portal. We can initiate a variety of retirement types online. We can provide one-on-one retirement counseling over the phone if needed, and we can actually maintain a retiree's account online if needed by doing direct deposit changes online, address changes online, and tax changes online. Having the building closed would present another operational challenge for us, as there are some critical processes that are driven by physical mail, such as receiving court orders for domestic relation orders, garnishments, levies, public records requests. Those all come in through the mail and not electronically, along with occasional correspondence from members for service requests, and also retiree healthcare reimbursements. Should it be that we do not have access to the building, we're developing contingency plans to actually get the mail, get it scanned in so that we can actually use our remote processing for that. As you know, we've already seen state mandated requirements to cancel gatherings. I will say that we are an organization of gatherings, some similar to our meeting today where we've had to take alternate measures. We're also doing that with very important meetings that we have with our plan sponsors. Rather than meeting in person, we're moving towards conference calls, and also with regards to our retirement seminars, rather than doing those in person, we are moving to webinars. We've got some scheduled coming up in the coming weeks. And I would just like to re-highlight with regards to the current drop in the global financial markets, as we have talked about liquidity. I just want to say SDCERS is a long-term investor. Our portfolio is structured and designed to weather significant market cycles, such as the one we are experiencing currently. But our portfolio is structured, designed liquidity and pay retirement benefits, and we have sufficient liquidity to pay our monthly retirement benefits now and into the future. So that wraps up my current version of our COVID-19 operational preparation, and I promise to keep the board up to date as the situation unfolds and as conditions change, and we have to move away from our normal operating procedures to make sure that everybody is in the communication loop. I would be glad to answer any questions about our current COVID preparation update. All right. I do have one other item. Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. This is Karina. I just wanted to understand in terms of database backup, is there a contingent location or a second area where certain files are backed up?
Yes. So the question is, do we have contingency plans with regards to our databases? And I'm very proud to report that SDCERS has a very robust disaster recovery business contingency plan that has been in operation for a number of years, that we do have tabletop exercises testing that plan on an occasional basis. Admittedly, I don't think we've done the COVID-19 test, but we've had a variety of different scenarios that we've tested. And this includes bringing up remote information data centers using backup tapes and doing so from remote sites. So yes, we do have backup capabilities, and they are currently currently being utilized now. And I'm looking at David Bond, our IT manager, to give me the thumbs up or the thumbs down. How'd I do? Got a thumbs up on that one. Okay, good.
Thank you.
I'd also like to recognize and thank the board for their attendance at our annual board offsite meeting this past Wednesday, February 12th. It seems like such a long time ago, but it was only a few weeks ago that we were meeting at the Prado in Balboa Park to discuss our 2021 strategic priorities and objectives, getting a global investment outlook from Hakim Fels, the Global Economic Advisor for PIMCO, getting a report from our ad hoc committee on the CEO evaluation process, and having a great discussion about good board governance. And it is this last topic that is so important in our current environment that seems to be full of so much uncertainty, but our good board governance is the rock in the storm with which we can weather any condition that comes our way. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any other questions you may have.
Don't hear any questions. I've been talking with Greg a little bit over the last 2 weeks about the impact on the organization of this health crisis, and I was immediately impressed with his knowledge and competence around this issue, and I'm encouraged to hear more and more details about how we can manage through this crisis. And so I feel encouraged that we're in good shape, and although certainly an unprecedented time, and so we will certainly look forward to hearing from you about other unexpected matters that may arise. But thanks for all you're doing. We appreciate it. Okay, if there are no further questions, then we are going to go into closed session for conference with legal counsel. We can still do that on the phone, right, guys? Yeah.
Yes, Carol, this is Johnny Tran. If you'd give us 1 minute to clear the room before I start, thank you.
Yeah, perfect, thank you.
Stop the tape and everything?
Yeah, this is just coming across like now. Yeah, I know. Oh, but my daughters technically, we live in San Diego, but it's Poway. We'll see what Poway does now because, yeah. Did you see that, Marcel?
Yeah.
How much you paid your bar dues?
You did.
Friday. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You take care.
See you in 2 months.
We are good.
Okay.
All right, Carol, we're back on the record, and there's nothing to report out of closed session.
Okay. So with that, we can adjourn the meeting, but let me just say quickly before we go that appreciate so much everybody's cooperation in having a meeting in this unusual format today. I think it was successful, and we'll all work together to get through this crisis, and I hope you all are safe and healthy. And with that, I adjourn the meeting.